The case begins on a manicured lawn in the Oakwood Hills subdivision, timestamp 1842, on a Tuesday evening that felt stolen from a postcard. The subject is Dr. Alastair Finch, a black man in his late 40s, dressed in worn surgical scrubs. He is on his knees, his hands covered in the saliva of his convulsing golden retriever, Apollo. The officer is Patrolman Dean Callahan, white, mid-30s, with a jaw set like concrete and eyes that had already passed judgment. The accusation, though never spoken aloud, was clear. The black man didn't belong here, and the chaos erupting on this perfect lawn was his fault. The officer was responding to a noise complaint from a neighbor, a Mr. Abernathy, who claimed a vicious stray was tearing up the yard. Officer Callahan arrived to find Dr. Finch desperately trying to save his family's dog from what was later confirmed to be a lethal dose of strychnine, deliberately mixed into a piece of steak and thrown over the fence. Instead of rendering aid or investigating the crime, Officer Callahan chose to investigate the victim. He would spend the next 7 minutes escalating a tragedy into a referendum on race and power, threatening a man whose hands had saved hundreds of lives with arrest, all while the real perpetrator watched from his porch with a satisfied smirk. This is the body cam footage of that encounter, a chilling record of how quickly prejudice can eclipse sworn duty and how a lifetime of achievement can be reduced to a threat profile in the blink of an eye. The flashing red and blue lights pulsed across Dr. Alastair Finch's face, catching the tears that mixed with the sweat on his brow. He wasn't thinking about the lights or the siren that chirped to a stop at his curb. He was thinking about intracellular sodium-potassium pumps and the neurotoxic cascade shutting down his dog's central nervous system. Apollo, his beautiful, goofy, 4-year-old golden retriever, was dying on the grass he loved to roll in. His body was rigid, seized by a violent tremor that racked his frame every few seconds. A thick, white foam flecked his muzzle, and his eyes, once so full of soft, trusting light, were wide with the terror Alastair could feel in his own bones. "Stay with me, boy. Stay with me," Alastair murmured, his voice a raw, broken thing. He had one hand stroking the dog's rigid neck, the other holding his phone to his ear, the tinny voice of the emergency vet receptionist a distant, useless sound. "Yes, he's seizing. Uncontrolled. I suspect poisoning. Strychnine, maybe." His muscles are tetanic. He was using clinical terms, his brain defaulting to the cold, analytical language of his profession to build a wall against the shattering grief. His wife, Maya, was a sobbing heap on the porch steps, her face buried in her hands. Her wails were thin, sharp sounds that pierced the calm suburban evening. The sight of her, so completely undone, was another weight on Alastair's chest. The crunch of gravel under heavy boots announced the officer's arrival. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the animal," a voice commanded, laced with an authority that grated on Alastair's frayed nerves. Alastair didn't look up. His focus was singular. Apollo's breathing was becoming shallow, his gums a pale, terrifying white. "He's my dog. His name is Apollo. He's been poisoned," Alastair said, his voice tight with the effort of holding himself together. "Someone needs to call for an animal control unit with a gurney. Now." He was a man accustomed to giving orders in life-or-death situations, and the tone was reflexive. It was not, however, a tone Officer Callahan appreciated from a man who, in his estimation, did not fit the demographic of this 7-figure home neighborhood. "I'll be the one giving the orders here," Callahan snapped, stepping closer. The body cam footage wobbled as he moved, the lens capturing the top of Alastair's head, the expensive landscaping, the brick facade of the house. "I got a call about a stray acting aggressively. Said it was foaming at the mouth. Rabid." Maybe the word rabid was a match tossed on gasoline. Alastair's head snapped up, his eyes, burning with a furious, desperate grief, finally locking with the officer's. "He is not rabid. He is a beloved family pet, and he is dying. Some bastard poisoned him. My neighbor, Mr. Abernathy, over there." Alastair jerked his head toward the house next door, where a silhouette stood partially concealed behind a porch column. "He's been complaining about Apollo's barking for weeks. Threatening him." Officer Callahan's gaze flickered toward the neighboring house, then back to Alastair, his expression unchanged. It was a look of profound, unshakable skepticism, the kind of look that said, Nice try, Mr. Abernathy is the one who called it in. Said a man was wrestling with a dangerous animal in his front yard. Said you looked agitated. The officer's hand drifted down, resting casually on the butt of his holstered firearm. It was a small movement, almost subconscious, but it was a clear signal. You are a threat. I am agitated because my dog is dying. Alistair's voice rose, cracking with anguish. He forced it back down, taking a slow, deliberate breath. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not for Apollo. Not for himself. Officer, please. I am a doctor. I know what I'm seeing. This is a medical emergency. We are wasting critical time. He tried to inject his voice with the calm authority he used in the operating room, the voice that soothed panicked family members and commanded respect from his residents. It didn't work. To Callahan, it sounded like arrogance. A doctor, huh? Okay. Doc, let's see some ID, the officer said, his tone dripping with condescension. He took another step forward, his boots now inches from Apollo's twitching paws. The dog let out a pained yelp, a sound that tore through Alistair. Don't you touch him, Alistair warned, his voice dropping to a low growl. He shifted his body, creating a barrier between the officer and his dog. My wallet is in the house. My wife can get it. Maya. His call was desperate, but Maya was lost in her own world of sorrow, her sobs the only answer. See, here's the problem, Callahan said, leaning in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper that made Alistair's skin crawl. I got a man who doesn't look like he belongs here, a potentially rabid dog, a hysterical woman on the porch. It's not adding up. So I'm going to ask you again. Step away from the dog. Alistair stared at the officer, a cold, clarifying rage beginning to burn through the fog of his grief. He saw it all now. The refusal to listen, the immediate assumption of guilt, the casual dismissal of his dog's life. It wasn't about a noise complaint. It wasn't about a stray dog. It was about him. A black man in scrubs on a perfect lawn, a variable that didn't compute in the officer's simple, prejudiced algebra. Across the street, a curtain twitched. A woman was peering out, her phone held up, the small red light of a recording blinking in the dusk. Another neighbor, a man walking his terrier, had stopped, his pace slowing as he took in the scene, his hand reaching for his own pocket. The audience was gathering. The silence stretched, broken only by Apollo's labored breaths and Maya's weeping. Alistair knew he was at a crossroads. Every instinct, every fiber of his being screamed at him to protect his family, to unleash the fury coiling in his gut. But he was a black man in America, and he knew that fury, however justified, could be a death sentence. He had to be smarter. He had to be calmer. He had to operate. Officer, he began, his voice devoid of all emotion, a flat, sterile instrument. You are making a grave mistake. The statement hung in the air, a quiet challenge. Callahan seemed to take it as a threat. His posture stiffened, his hand tightening on his weapon. Is that what you think? You think you can threaten me? He scoffed, a smirk playing on his lips. You don't seem to understand the situation you're in, pal. Right now, you are interfering with an investigation. You are failing to comply with a lawful order. I can take you into custody right now, and believe me, it will be a lot more uncomfortable than this lawn. The officer gestured vaguely with his chin toward his patrol car, the cage in the back a stark, steel promise. Alistair felt a tremor of fear, not for himself, but for Apollo. If he was arrested, his dog would die here on the grass, alone. That was not an option. He had to de-escalate, but he would not surrender his dignity or the truth of the situation. He carefully, slowly, reached into the pocket of his scrubs. Callahan tensed instantly. Whoa. Hands where I can see them. Show me your hands. Now, he shouted, his voice booming through the quiet street. Alistair froze, his hand still in his pocket. He raised his other hand in a placating gesture. My phone, officer, he said, his voice still unnervingly calm. I am calling the chief of police. His name is Frank Donovan. He's a friend of mine. I'm also calling my attorney. This was a gamble. Name-dropping could backfire spectacularly, making him seem arrogant and further inflaming the officer's ego. But it was the only move he had left, a verbal scalpel to cut through the thick hide of Callahan's prejudice. The officer's eyes narrowed. You think you're the first guy to try that trick? I know the chief, yeah right. Get your hand out of your pocket. Slowly, Alistair complied, pulling his phone out and holding it up, screen side out. He didn't have the chief's number memorized, but the threat was the point. He looked past Callahan, his gaze locking with the smirking silhouette on the neighboring porch. Abernathy. The man had watered his petunias just an hour ago, nodding a curt hello. Now he stood there, watching this unfold, a spectator at a drama he had authored. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. That man, Alistair said, his voice resonating with a new, hard edge of conviction, is Roger Abernathy. He threw a piece of meat over the fence approximately 20 minutes ago. My dog, who has never been aggressive a day in his life, consumed it. 5 minutes later, the seizures began. Those are the facts. You can choose to ignore them, or you can choose to do your job and investigate a felony. Because poisoning an animal is a felony in this state, officer. Penal Code 596. I'm sure you're familiar with it. The citation of the specific legal code was another precise incision. It signaled something beyond the average citizen's knowledge. It signaled a familiarity with the system Callahan represented. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed the officer's face. It was quickly replaced by renewed bluster. You think you can lecture me on the law? I'm the one with the badge here, Doc. He spat the title like it was an insult. Now, I'm done asking. Get up and put your hands behind your back. He reached for his handcuffs, the metallic click echoing in the tense silence. The neighbors across the street were now fully on their lawn, their phones out and aimed directly at the scene. The man with the terrier had his phone up too. The silent sentinels of the digital age were bearing witness. Alistair knew this was the final moment, the point of no return. He had to play his last card. He looked directly into the lens of the body cam he knew was recording every word, every nuance. He was no longer speaking to Callahan. He was speaking to the inevitable review board, to the jury, to the court of public opinion. My name is Dr. Alistair Finch, he said, his voice clear and steady, the voice of a man dictating a patient's chart. My badge ID from St. Jude's General Hospital is in my wallet, inside the front door. I am the chief of neurosurgery at that hospital, the hospital that holds the primary emergency services contract for this city's entire police force. When you or one of your fellow officers gets into a car accident or, God forbid, gets shot in the line of duty, you are brought to my emergency room. My team is the one that puts you back together. Your own police chief, Frank Donovan, had a cerebral aneurysm clipped by me 18 months ago. His wife sent me a Christmas card. He let the words settle, each one a carefully placed weight on the scales of power. He watched Callahan's face. The confident smirk faltered. The hard set of his jaw slackened. The color seemed to drain from his cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, mottled gray. The officer's mind was visibly racing, trying to process this new, paradigm-shifting information. This wasn't some random guy in a nice house. This was someone embedded in the very infrastructure of the city's power elite. Someone who couldn't be dismissed, couldn't be bullied, couldn't be made to disappear into the system. You're Dr. Finch. Callahan stammered, the name clearly ringing a bell now. The name from the newspaper articles about the new surgical wing. The name on the hospital gala invitations. The name Chief Donovan had mentioned with reverence at the last precinct barbecue. The entire dynamic of the encounter tilted on its axis. The power, which Callahan had wielded with such casual cruelty, was draining away from him, flowing like a current toward the calm, kneeling man in the blood-flecked scrubs. He looked from Alistair's face to the dying dog, and then to the smug neighbor on the porch. The pieces of the puzzle were reassembling themselves in his head, but this time they formed a picture of his own catastrophic misjudgment. Before Callahan could formulate a response, a second patrol car pulled up, this one without sirens. A sergeant stepped out, a man with graying temples and a weary expression. Sergeant Kent. He took one look at the scene, the phones recording, the distraught woman on the porch, Callahan standing frozen over a kneeling Alistair and a seizing dog, and his face tightened with alarm. Callahan, what the hell is going on here? Kent's voice was a low growl of authority. He walked over, his eyes scanning everything, assessing the situation with an experienced gaze that Callahan lacked. Sarge, we had a call, Callahan began, his voice trailing off. He sounded like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Alistair didn't wait. Sergeant, he said, looking up at the new arrival. Thank God. My dog has been poisoned by my neighbor, Roger Abernathy. Your officer has been detaining me and preventing me from seeking veterinary care for the last 10 minutes. Sergeant Kent's eyes widened slightly as he recognized Alistair. Dr. Finch? Is that you? It is, Alistair said, his voice thick with a relief so profound it almost brought him to his knees. And my dog is dying. Please, I need to get him to the clinic on Elm Street. Now, the sergeant didn't hesitate. He turned on Callahan, his face a mask of cold fury. Callahan, get on the radio and tell dispatch we need animal control here on the double for evidence collection, and then you go secure Mr. Abernathy. Now, move. He then knelt beside Alistair, his demeanor changing completely. Doctor, I am so sorry. Let's get him in my car. We'll get him there faster. The whiplash was dizzying. One moment, Alistair was a suspect, a threat. The next, he was Dr. Finch, a VIP to be assisted. The only thing that had changed was the recognition of his name, his status. The injustice of it was a bitter pill, but he swallowed it down. All that mattered was Apollo. Together, he and Sergeant Kent carefully lifted the dog's rigid body, the muscles hard as stone beneath the soft fur. Apollo let out a low, agonizing moan. As they carried him to the sergeant's car, Alistair glanced back. He saw Officer Callahan, his face pale and sweating under the streetlights, knocking on Abernathy's door. The smirk was gone from the neighbor's face, replaced by a look of dawning panic. The viral video hit the local news websites by morning. It was grainy, shot from across the street, but the audio was crystal clear. You could hear Callahan's condescending tone, Alistair's desperate, controlled pleas, and the final, stunning reveal of his identity. The body cam footage, requested under the Freedom of Information Act by every news outlet in the state, was released 3 days later. It was even more damning. It showed Callahan's bias from the first second he stepped out of his car. The internal investigation was swift and merciless. Officer Dean Callahan was suspended without pay, and the police chief issued a public, formal apology to Dr. Finch and his family, calling the officer's conduct a gross violation of the standards of our department. The apology felt hollow to Alistair. It wasn't the conduct of one officer that was the problem. It was the system that had created and enabled him. Apollo survived. Just barely. The vet bill climbed to over $100,000 after 2 weeks in the ICU, multiple blood transfusions, and intensive therapy to deal with the neurological damage. He would never be the same dog. He had a slight tremor in his hind legs and was easily startled by loud noises, a ghostly echo of the poison that had nearly claimed him. But he was alive. He would curl up at Alistair's feet in the evenings, his head resting on his master's slippers, and Alistair would stroke his fur and feel a gratitude so fierce it ached. Roger Abernathy was arrested the night of the incident. The half-eaten steak, laced with a commercial-grade pesticide containing strychnine, was found in his trash can. He was charged with felony animal cruelty. His defense attorney tried to argue that he was just trying to scare a menacing animal, but the neighborhood security cameras, which Alistair had subpoenaed, showed Apollo playing gently with children just hours before the poisoning. Abernathy was a man consumed by a petty, racist hatred, who saw a black family's joy and decided it was a threat to his own peace. He was found guilty and sentenced to 2 years in prison, the maximum allowed. Alistair and Maya also filed a civil suit against him for the veterinary bills and emotional distress. They won, and the court placed a lien on Abernathy's house in Oakwood Hills, the very property he had been so desperate to protect from the perceived blight of his new neighbors. Months later, Alistair sat on his porch, a sleeping Apollo at his side. The street was quiet again, the manicured lawns pristine under the setting sun. He often replayed the incident in his mind, not with anger anymore, but with a chilling sense of clarity. He had survived his encounter with Officer Callahan not because he was innocent, not because he was right, but because he was Dr. Alistair Finch, chief of neurosurgery. He had a shield forged of status, education, and connections. He wondered what would have happened if he had been Alistair Finch, the plumber, or the teacher, or the student. He knew the answer. He would have been in handcuffs. His dog would have died on the lawn. And the story would have been about an agitated, non-compliant suspect and a dangerous, rabid dog. His credentials hadn't just saved his dog, they had saved him. It was a vindication that tasted like ash, a victory that highlighted a much larger, more profound loss. The system hadn't worked. It had been circumvented by privilege. And as he watched the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky, he felt not the peace of a battle won, but the heavy, unyielding weight of the war that was still raging.